One of the cool things about social media is that you get a chance to meet people from all walks of life that you maybe would not have ordinarily met, but you find you have all these great things in common with. And that was the situation today with our guest, Natalia Mehlman Petrzela. Now, she is an associate professor of history at the New School that's up in New York City. And she is the author of a new book called Fit Nation, The Gains and Pains of America's Exercise Obsession, that just came out through University of Chicago Press this year. And like me, she's got a real love for working out, for training, for exercise, things like that. And I say that like me, like I'm nobody's cut out of wood kind of a guy, but I just enjoy the prospect, the aspect of like going in, getting a workout in and feeling good later on, but also wrestle with like, what does this mean? Like what, when I go to the gym, do I post a picture afterwards? Like, does this say something about me? How am I internalizing myself? I don't know. And she talks about this in her book about how people internalize the body, how they internalize internalizing the body, how that changes the way that we go to the gym, how it changes the way that we look at the world around us. And so when I reached out to her, I was like, hey, do you want to do this pod? She's like, yeah. And I got the perfect movie for you. It's called Perfect. And I'd never heard of this movie. It comes out in 1985. Stars John Travolta, Jamie Lee Curtis. Kind of slips under the radar. And it's about this real life story of this expose, this story that gets written about these gyms in the early 80s by this Rolling Stone writer. And this movie becomes when I watch it, becomes such an amazing artifact of the time and period. And we have so many great things to talk about. Of course, we're going to talk about bodies on screen. We talk about Arnold Schwarzenegger. We talk about dieting and fads and CrossFit. We have the best talk. So I hope you guys are going to enjoy this conversation. We had a blast. I learned so much every time I talked to Natalia. I think you're going to like it. So sit back and relax because we're not skipping leg day. Perfect is next on Historians of Movies podcast. All right, Natalia, how you doing today?
I'm great. I am. It's a beautiful day in New York City, which is not something we can say all the time. So I'm feeling good.
Now, what borough is New York? Are you Brooklyn? Where are you?
I'm in Manhattan, actually.
Manhattan. Okay. Like, I don't know. I'm a poor Floridian who does not know. Like, we always say, like, Florida is like the sixth borough, right? And
totally.
Like, we're just talking off camera, like, oh, you're near West Palm Beach. Of course, that is where our people go, right? Like down here.
Totally.
I mean, it's. Oh my gosh, right? And like, have you always lived in the city? Is the city home for you?
No, I'm actually from outside of Boston, so I grew up there. But I got to New York as quickly as I could. I went to college here, and I went to California for grad school. But then I moved back. I'm like a little bit of a caricature of like coastal lib, I have to say, like given where I've lived. But I try to at least be self-aware, so I got that.
Well, self-aware is not a thing we really go for here. So it's self-aware standards, basic any. So when was the last time I was in this city? It was 3 years ago. I always enjoy getting up there, but man, it is a lot for me. It is so it's like stimulus overload for me whenever I'm in the city. Are
you from Florida?
No, I'm actually from Kentucky originally, right?
Oh,
so I grew up I am the not coastal. I grew up in Kentucky and Louisiana and Tennessee. And then I found the ocean. I ended up doing I did a college internship. They did this college program at Walt Disney World when I was 21.
Yeah.
And I was I found Florida for the first time. I was like, what is this place? And I found the ocean.
Yeah.
And just totally fell in love with it. And I've lived other places too. I lived, when I did graduate school in Minnesota and found there were lots of things. I think I could live almost anywhere except for maybe Indiana and be happy. I could find someplace that would make me happy most anywhere. But,
I agree. Every place has its pros and cons. I will say one of the few states I've never been to is Kentucky. So I got to rectify that. Yeah, totally.
All right. Well, see, actually, you're actually in Kentucky right now. See, where I am as a sovereign Kentuckian, I create a space, an embassy, if you will. So it's like going to, being in Berlin and going to the American Embassy. You're now on hallowed ground, if you will. So pretty soon, you'll go out and you'll find yourself saying y'all later on.
Oh, wow. Well, that's funny you say that because y'all is something that a lot of New Yorkers say because it's like gender neutral, like rather than you
It's the
guys.
perfect pronoun.
It is, but honestly, like I feel like I end up self-appointing as like I don't know, like a Southern advocate because I'm like it feels really weird when people with New York accents like are
Do you feel
appropriating the
like you're
Southernism. Totally, I don't do it. I try to be like people or defend because it just doesn't seem. I don't know. I feel like I'm like taking a regionalism that is not mine, and it like really feels awkward.
It is my regionalism, and I will now, again, because we're on the embassy and you're my friend, I will now I'll entitle you. This is a gift of my people to y'all. In fact, I'm going to give you one more. I'm going to give you
Let's
Bless Your
hear
Heart.
it. Bless you. Oh,
Bless Your Heart?
yes, I do. I do know Bless Your Heart. I've never dared to use it, but now you've equipped me with this new.
It is so
these
awesome.
New linguistic toys. I'm gonna like have everybody being like, "Wait, what? She sounds so East Coast. Why is she talking like that?"
Oh, see that you'll be like a transformer. You'll be like Natalia in disguise. Like when I was in Minnesota, and I really enjoyed Minnesota for the most part. But people there are a lot of folks there are like Scandinavian ancestry and stuff like that. And I'm not anti-Scandinavia, but there's a very passive aggressiveness to Minnesotans. They call it Minnesota nice, right? Mm-hmm. And I really struggled with it when I first got there. I was like, what's going on with these folks? Why are they so, they got this defense thing? And then I realized early on, like, oh wait, we have this too. It's called Bless Your Heart, right? And then once I'm like, Jason, your ancestors gave you this weapon. Deploy. So, and of course, you can use it. So
that's
you can
really
use it
funny.
any kind of way.
Yeah, it's funny. I was just in Minnesota actually last weekend, I think, and a friend of mine who lives there was saying that like there's some saying like Minnesotans are really nice. They'll tell you directions anywhere except their house.
It's true. They're very, very insular. Like very much like there's very much you're either from Minnesota and you hang out with other native Minnesotans, or you hang out with all the other people. And I love like the Twin Cities are like some of my favorite places. Just loved it. But it was a different trying to crack some of those social circles, which is weird because I'm friends with everybody.
Yeah, you strike me as pretty extroverted.
Yeah, I'm just like.
Well, I will tell you, New York is a great place to be because everyone's been an outsider. So thus everyone is like basically becomes an insider pretty quickly. And there's none of that like covert, like obnoxiousness. Like people are overtly obnoxious or overtly nice, but they kind of wear it on their sleeve, which I really appreciate.
Okay, so I have to tell you, we're doing this pod on this movie. We'll get into the movie. Yeah. One of the running gags on this is we'll get into the movie about 45 minutes. But it's fine. So not being from New York, being an outsider, pop culture, these movies, like movie we watched for this thing, part of it's in New York, tells you that New Yorkers are by nature rude, hard to get along with, stuff like that. And then I went to New York for the first time and I was like braced up to people so nice. It was ridiculous. I was shocked by this.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I think New Yorkers are very used to being up in each other's faces all the time. Mm-hmm. So proximity doesn't freak them out. No one's going to be reflexively rude or weirded out if you just ask them a question or come up to them. And I think a lot of people are just also just nice, but that's a big deal. Living in New York, I take the subway every day pretty much. And, I always think about that having lived some other places, multiple times a day, you're close enough to strangers to see their pores. That is a proximity that you just don't have when you drive, and it's kind of gross. And I think the reason sometimes New Yorkers aren't good morning is because you've got to have that kind of shield a little bit around you to create some personal space. It's so different. Where were we just recently? Oh, we were in California this summer. My husband and I, we were on a hike and everyone's hello, good morning as they walk by. You don't even make eye contact in New York because you got to create that space, but people aren't weirded out by proximity. So yeah, I really love New York and New Yorkers.
Well, let me ask you this, because now that we're getting going and we've already talked about where you live and all these places where you're why don't you tell us our audience about you and who you are and what are you doing here today?
Yeah. So my name is Natalia Petrzela and I'm a historian, obviously. And most recently I wrote this book called Fit Nation, The Gains and Pains of America's Exercise Obsession. And it is all about how America, the United States, went from being a country where the thought of working out was weird to being one where, everybody everybody, as much as we disagree on things, kind of agrees like exercise is good for you. On the other hand, only 20% of Americans actually do the recommended minimum amount of exercise. So I wanted to figure out how that happened. And so the story is basically one of, well, we have this idea of exercise that's really good for you that has become very widespread. It explains how that happens. But that idea has mainly been promoted and made available through a private industry. So it's actually like not at all a right of citizenship to be fit, to exercise, et cetera. So I tell those stories. So that's like my intellectual biography a little bit, but I'm a professor at the New School here in New York City. I'm a mom. I have 2 kids. I don't know. I was a fitness instructor for a long time and I still teach sometimes. So I come to this work from multiple perspectives.
I have so I've been gearing up for that. I was a little shy to ask you to do this pod because I was like,
why?
Well, we'll get into it a bit, because I work out a lot and stuff like that. Obviously, as one can tell, it's not a dad bod; it's a father figure, is what I like to consider myself as having. I try, but yeah, so you are really keenly an expert on a thing that I very much enjoy, which is working out. We'll get into all this. It's interesting, how even the phrasing, do we call it exercise, working out, lifting weights, whatever it is.
Right.
I'm sure that there's some gendered or ideas behind all of this kind
training.
of stuff.
Yeah.
Training.
Yeah.
Keeping my headspace clear, whatever.
Self-care. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, it's so true, right? All right, I have the most important question. We're going to ask you this entire thing, which goes against everything we're about to talk about. Coke or Pepsi?
Oh, so I gave up all soda a bunch of times. I'm currently still on the wagon. But I will say I was a hardcore Diet Pepsi, multiple times a day kind of person. But I like the Coca Light, like the stuff in other countries, Coke Zero, basically. So right now I'm a teetotaler in terms of these things, but I do love Pepsi. How about you?
Well, I'm Team Coke for life, right?
Oh,
This is my mother would tell me, and
well, the South, Atlanta,
right,
yeah, totally,
definitely, right. And my mom tells me stories about how I was drinking soda in a bottle. I'm like, that's probably not. I mean,
show me those teeth.
Just kidding. Yeah, dude, for reals. And it's for me, it's more of an ideology, but also there's a really interesting idea about the way that even now soda and non-water drinks get marketed into lifestyle, weight training, stuff like that. Every time I drink a soda, I'm like, I have to work out this much more because I know how much sugar is there's a corollary there. So,
well, yeah, it's so interesting. This is more me just as a human being rather than as a scholar. But I do think it's so interesting. I assume we're probably about the same age. I'm 44.
I am older than you.
Okay. Well,
I'm 45.
Okay, yeah, so old. I'll be 45 in October, so I'm right
46 in July.
Oh, damn! So clearly, we have nothing in common, old man.
Respect my authority. Oh wow, you went there.
But anyway, so you remember, we grew up in the age where 0 calories was considered health food. And I remember so clearly, I was a nutty teenager obsessed with counting calories in ways that were very unhealthy. But when I thought I was quote unquote being good, I was drinking Diet Coke and having 0 fat frozen yogurt. And that was filled with chemicals. It's interesting now, I talk to nutritionist friends and this was when I was drinking Diet Coke and kind of still stuck in that 90s mentality. And they're like, oh, what do you drink besides water? And I'm like, well, have a couple of Diet Pepsis a day. And she's like, you've just got to stop. That is so bad for your bones. It makes you bloated. It makes you all these things. And it's not that it turns into fat, but it's bad for your body and actually can make you look fat. And so I thought I thought all of that was just really interesting because I grew up so much with fewer calories is good for you, even if fewer calories comes from a bunch of chemicals,
Yeah, it's well, we say that I'm literally drinking Gatorade Zero as we're talking. Right?
Yeah.
So, but yeah, all right. So I want to ask you about actually this movie.
Let's talk.
Okay, so I reached out, hey, let's do something, and there's no shortage. Bodily representation on film and social media is very crucial in a lot of ways, a lot of different ways. Way we identify ourselves, the way we market things, so forth. And I was like, there's gonna be no shortage of movies she's gonna want to choose from. And then you chose this movie I had never heard of, and I watch a lot of movies now for some reason. Why Perfect? Why this movie from 85 that I watched last night.
Yeah, so you probably have it fresher than I do, although I've seen it a
Oh
lot
my
of
gosh.
times. Well, so you very kindly were like, we can talk about any movie, but
Totally.
me totally being in like book promo mode and genuinely liking this movie, I was like, we got to talk about Perfect. In part because like no one's seen it. Like you're a total cinephile, and like
Oh my
you didn't know
God.
about it. And these are big actors in there. That's John Travolta, Jamie Lee Curtis. Like this was not a small production, and so I mean, I chose it because it just hits on the themes that I write about of like, the emergence of workout culture in the 1980s, the kind of place of the gym as like a social site, all this kind of like regional difference between like so-called like dim-witted LA and like cerebral New York. And like there are
Mm-hmm.
all these things in there about class, and it just has so many freaking rich themes. And I will say, I hadn't heard of this movie either until I was doing an oral history with this great guy, Leslie Kamenoff, who is a yoga expert and just like totally a brilliant guy, but and someone who kept all his papers, so that's pretty cool for a historian
Nice.
too. But he was like, oh my God, you're writing about the sports connection, right? Which is the gym that's portrayed in Perfect. And so he was like, go watch Perfect, that's your first step. And I watched it and I was like, how did I know about this movie? So now it is my mission for the rest of the world to know about this movie too.
Can I tell you that you have already started to succeed on this? I have been broadcasting to all my friends about this movie since like last night
Yay!
and this morning. Okay, first I'm going to go ahead and I need to go ahead and out myself on this because I was thinking last night because I was watching this movie and I'm watching Travolta, and I guess Jamie Lee Curtis is like 27 in this movie when they're making it. And I'm watching this going, oh my God, she might be perfect. Like I was transported, like Jamie Lee Curtis, like my first crush. And I was like, oh my God.
Glad I could help you revisit that.
She's stunning in this movie. Like
Gorgeous.
I was actually telling our producer this morning, I was like, I think the camera was invented to study her face. Like she's stunning in this movie.
Totally.
And it's also, this movie is totally an artifact. It's like, I was thinking about how I would teach the 1980s. I think this movie would like absolutely go well into any discussion.
Yeah.
On the 1980s itself.
I totally agree. It's hard to know which scenes to pick. I mean, it's so long. It's like a really long movie, I felt. Yeah.
It's long, right? Can I tell you the one that got to be like early on is like when he's like, what? She's like, what is this? He's like, this is a computer. How do you work it? I was like, oh my gosh, like this. And then it becomes pivotal in the film, like later on. Even that, it's like, I just leave it on.
Totally. And it's also like this is kind of like, I love this movie, but it is sort of like a love to hate movie because like it is so unsubtle and like everything. And like that whole thing with the computer. Okay. Yeah, it's fine. That thing with the computer is very funny too, because like one, there's like a funny sex scene in there, right? But like
the courtship scene when she wrote the thing, I was like, oh, this is that kind of film. Okay,
well, didn't that remind you of, is it 16 Candles when Molly Ringwald and like the other guy, or maybe Pretty in Pink, are in the library and they're like writing to each other on the terminals, and then they like look up and see each other over the thing? It reminded me of like a NC-17 version of that.
Yeah, I was like, not like, I'm not going to spoil like a 40-year-old movie. People need to go watch it. Like, there's a point in time, but it's like, God, so yeah, this movie's, it's long. It's like, it's 2 hours, just over 2 hours. Something like it could use some editing. I don't know how much they needed, like the organized crime, like scene, like I'm just like, you have to use it for the very end for them to get back together. But it's like,
Yeah, I don't think they needed that theme that much. What I was going to say about the computer though is like, in this like heavy-handed symbolism is like, so there's this like, theme that comes up all the time in like writing and fitness culture of like the cerebral New York journalist versus like the bimbo dummy, like meathead world of California fitness culture. Right. And I thought that was kind of funny because the computer is so much meant to symbolize like the world of this, like, tech, the intellectual, like high tech guy. She doesn't even know what that is. But then he shows up and he's like this total fish out of water in the sports connection. Like, oh my God, what's this aerobics class? And like, what are these weird, like vegetable drinks that you're drinking and all of that? And so I think that was sort of like, a way that, an interesting way to signify their cultural difference and what clearly is considered to be the superiority in that case of like this New York journalist.
Oh, clearly. I guess maybe we should let's provide some context for people who haven't actually seen the film, just so people know
Who
what's going on,
hasn't
right?
seen
'Cause
it? Yeah.
who hasn't seen this movie? I thought everybody had seen this movie. I think there's a movie here. Like, I think it needed some editing, but overall, I found myself enjoying the film.
I'm glad.
I think people should watch it.
Yeah, I think so too.
You've got a guy, reporter Travolta, for the Rolling Stone, goes out to cover this new fad in American lifestyle, right? Like a fitness center, like the Sports Connection. This is a real place.
Oh, yeah. The Sports Connection was a real place. Yeah. In the early 80s. And it was one of these health clubs that was considered to be really pathbreaking because unlike these like dingy pumping iron gyms or these like weird ladies only salons with these vibrating belts that were like almost more like beauty salons, this was co-ed and it was aerobics and it had Nautilus machines. There were juice bars, squash courts. It was like this all-inclusive health club, which really, as the story in Rolling Stone that he writes says, was like the new singles bar where like people would go to see and be seen and hook up, and they had like their own sort of social hierarchy within that.
Yeah, and they're like leaning into this idea of sports. Like they're like, this is what you do, right? If you're into this, and go look at the bodies and be part of this. And is this a different time in American history where people are starting to think about going to the gym in this way, like that you could do this? I mean, what's going on in American gym culture in the early 80s?
Totally. So it is a moment when like gym culture really explodes. And, people had been exercising not for sports and kind of, for just health and fitness and beauty always, but it really blows up in the 1980s. And one of the reasons that it blows up is there's this big kind of discovery in exercise science in the late 60s, which is essentially that cardio is good for you. And so whereas before exercise was kind of considered to be military style calisthenics or lifting weights, like now there's this idea that running and swimming and biking and eventually dance aerobics are good for you and everybody should be doing this. And so that really is this kind of sea change. And out of that, like cardio enthusiasm, there are all these women who like want to get involved, but they're like, I don't want to run in the streets. Like I'm getting catcalled, whatever. So you have this like dance cardio movement that like comes out of there. Then another innovation around weightlifting, which I think is super important, is that you have the development of these Nautilus machines in the late 70s and early 80s. And so as opposed to lifting weights being like, oh, it's like so intimidating. You have to like go and up to the rack and like have these big plates and everyone can see you. Like Nautilus machines are this little pin that you put in. And so both of those developments mean that a lot more people, I think, feel like they can and should be working out. And so there emerges like all these facilities to cater to that. And one's like the Sports Connection, which was called the Sports Erection casually, because so many people like would hook up there, really rise to kind of like meet that demand. So that's one, I think, like tributary. The other really important one that I'll just say is like a lot of these gyms are very much shaped from the nightclub world and especially like the gay nightclub world. So gay men's gyms were always like a big thing, but you really start to see in the late 70s and early 80s, like all these guys who were like nightclub entrepreneurs and maybe ran like men's gyms are actually being in these more kind of like mainstream fitness environments, especially the kind of dance aerobics part of it.
There is a significant portion, like when they go into Sports Connection, you see men and women there. And of course, I think in 2023, that's not a surprise. When I go to my local gym, probably about the same amount of men or women, maybe a few more men or something like that. But yeah, it's generally equal. Was this always the case? Do women go to gyms as much as men? Is there a time when women start attending these? What happens here on the sexual dynamic?
Yeah. So first of all, gyms are sex segregated, like mostly well into the 1970s. Like even facilities that would cater to men and women would probably have ladies' days or a ladies' section. So like that is a really pretty new thing in the 1980s. And then like, why was that? So it's really interesting. Like exercise is seen as kind of unsavory for both men and women for very different reasons, for like really the whole beginning decades of the 20th century. For men, the idea that you would care so much what you look like and that you would want to get involved in this physical exertion that's not to like win a sport or be with a team is considered really suspicious. So men who wanted to work on their bodies, particularly to change their looks, were considered like insufficiently cerebral and like kind of sexually deviant, especially because the gyms that existed were in some places, places where men who did want to meet other men romantically would meet up. And so there was this set, and physique culture. It's true that physique culture through magazines and through these men's clubs absolutely was a place, like, prior to Stonewall, where gay men could find each other. So that was both like a totally homophobic and unfair set of assumptions, and also corresponded to some like, real things that were going on. So that's for men, right? And that this also speaks to like a real divide, like a sense that like mind and body were kind of disconnected. Like the idea that was like, if you're a man spending so much time on your body, like you must be dumb. You're just a meathead because that's not good for your mind. You're like, you should not engage in cerebral work. So that's like conspiring to keep men out of the gym. For women, it's very different. Women, of course, it's considered totally normal for women to want to be pretty and thin and think about their bodies and their health. Like that's considered very normal. And so you do have like these early kind of reducing or slenderizing spas that are connected to beauty salons. And those tend to advertise themselves as like no exertion needed, relax in luxurious comfort. And they tend to be like those belts that like shake your body, to get rid of cellulite or fat. And those are, the idea is like the passivity, because like real ladies don't sweat. And so it was interesting, like that is, I think, a really important like early chapter for women's gyms. But the women who are advocating for like women to do sports, et cetera, they have such an uphill battle, because like people are saying, oh no, like, women are going to build muscles. That's masculine. Anything too rigorous is going to damage their fertility, like their uteruses could fall out. And that also, especially with sports, that women are going to be competitive and individualistic. And that is not something that we want to support. So early on, men and women faced like different barriers to the idea they should work out regularly, but both significant ones. And then once these things started to erode or transform, there still was really a sense that men and women should not be doing this kind of like intimate act in the company of one another. Like it's kind of private.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like I'm thinking about this, and I'm thinking about, okay, there's the men-women issue here. I'm wondering about the ways in which like exercise was adopted by class and status, like who starts attending to gyms, or like who's doing because it costs money to do these things. Yep. I go to the gym now. I'll post pictures or do whatever. But for the longest time, I was very shy about lifting weights in front of another human being.
Yeah.
You just talk about the Nautilus machines, the ability to like discreetly put whatever weight you're on there.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, what if I'm doing it wrong? Or what does someone think of me?
Totally.
It takes some chutzpah to like go and like
and do that.
Yeah,
totally. So it's interesting. So that kind of insecurity, which I think is totally natural. I have that too. Like walking up to a new machine, like, am I going to mess up?
Oh my God, yes.
That's in some ways timeless, but also like of our moment where we like assume that we should know what we're doing. What's interesting is early on, especially for men, there are all of these like home fitness products that are marketing to men, and the idea is like you can do this privately, and because you don't want anyone to know you even care about your body and how it looks, but you probably do. So you can do this on your own. And I think that's so interesting, because like they'd sell these devices that you could like hide away. It's so different from today when people are like, oh, look at my Peloton, and it's like, look at my home gym, like that kind of display, even if you're working at home, because we think like we should know what we're doing at the gym. This should be part of our lifestyle,
There's such this like reverse vanity thing going on. It's like people don't want we don't want you to think you're going to the gym because you'll be seen as being vain. Therefore, in vain, I will train at home. It's like, oh my gosh, there's so many layers.
So many layers.
We can't get out of our own heads,
right? And then what I think about recently, which is I don't know, I guess it goes back beyond today, but like I am fine. I think about how I shouldn't say I think about how we are, I think, more okay with people posting like, oh, I'm working out, look how hard I'm working, versus like, oh, look, I'm dieting and not eating anything, or I'm using Ozempic. I've been watching some of these like health influencers, kind of grapple with the Ozempic thing, this weight loss drug. And it's super interesting. And I think that, I'm not that kind of doctor, right? So like, I don't know, I'm sure it's totally like appropriate for some people. I'm not judging that at all. But I do think some of the reason that there's pushback to people using Ozempic is because we have this like American work ethic in a way that's like, oh, well, if you're like sweating it out on the treadmill or pumping iron and working hard, like that's legitimate focus on your body versus like, I'm just going to, take an injection or take a diet pill or something. So I haven't totally worked that out, but I think that's something that's happening right now.
Well, I am that kind of doctor because I'm a doctor of history. And I think historically, what I would tell people is absolutely take all the drugs and medication you want. Obviously, that clearly.
More drugs.
Side effects, right? Yeah, totally. My analysis, which may or may not be correct, says by all means, take Ozempic, take, whatever.
Yeah, on the plane when they're like, is there a doctor on board? Are you like, indeed there is.
Oh my God, that actually happened to me on a recent flight where like someone was like, is there a doctor on board? I was like, he was feeling better, And so the person ended up being fine, but I was like, man, I don't want to return.
Could drop a lecture. You're like, let me just get a podcast in your ears real quick.
Yeah. You guys want a story while we're waiting and see how things go?
That's so
I was like,
funny.
We'll create an archive of this situation.
Right. Glad you're on board.
I want to ask you about Arnold. Does he change things in the United States? Like
totally.
What happens? What does Arnold do for America?
Yes, Arnold absolutely changes things in the United States.
Schwarzenegger, in case people are wondering.
Yes, totally. So Arnold Schwarzenegger is many things, but one of the things that he is he is this bodybuilder who really kind of, he brings attention to this subculture, which absolutely remains a subculture, by the way, and becomes, I think, even more subcultural, like as time goes on. But he brings attention to this subculture of bodybuilding. And in doing so, he kind of helps to mainstream the idea of working out, working on your body and lifting weights, and to kind of make it, to make it more positive, and to make more people want to participate in it. But I do think, if you watch Pumping Iron, have you watched Pumping Iron? Yeah. Okay. Just making sure. So if you watch Pumping Iron, this documentary, which is credited with really bringing a lot of attention to bodybuilding, it's true that it helps popularize and mainstream this activity. And Arnold is the most prominent face of it. But if you really think about the function that it served, it's still very much a voyeuristic film about a very weird subculture that few people actually ever would aspire to participate in. And so I think that Arnold is so important. And that's probably the most famous moment or whatever, where he brings that into the public sphere. But I would say he's equally as important with in terms of taking that influence and that kind of profile that he has as an exercise expert and creating programs in California around public schools and fitness. And he was on the Presidential Council of Fitness. So, it's not almost nobody is going to bodybuild the way that he and his buddies there are bodybuilding, but it did do a lot to kind of mainstream exercise for sure.
One of the things I really dig about Arnold is that, of course he has this, this Pumping Iron, and people should watch it just as an artifact. I think it's fascinating. And the mind games that he plays with Ferrigno are legendary.
Totally.
Just, oh my gosh. It's I think about Schwarzenegger. Yeah, sure, he's a bodybuilder, but this dude is a 6'2" walking can of charisma. I mean, because
one thing I think that is so important about that too, when we were talking about how lifting weights is seen, or working out for men was seen as challenging their masculinity rather than affirming it. You see that so much in that movie, because here's this big macho dude with these muscles who, from our perspective, is this superhero and this alpha guy and whatever. In there, I mean, he has to lean so hard into being yeah, I have all these women, I have threesomes, yeah, I'm so straight, because he gets asked in a lot. I don't remember if it's in the movie, but definitely in the publicity around the movie, he says things, pardon my French, I'm quoting him. He says I'm so sick of people thinking I'm a fag just because I want my body to look nice, And I think that we can kind of forget that when now it's isn't it natural that every man wants big biceps and is going to go to the gym and work on those?
Well, okay. Well, here comes the next question, because one of the things, we've been doing this HATM thing now for almost 5 years now. And it's one of the things that becomes apparent is the ways in which bodies, both men and women, are portrayed on screen. Right. And in a lot of ways, I think that, I don't think it's a surprise that there is the ideal aesthetic that gets portrayed, or at least that's what people are buying into. And we start to see, I'm kind of wondering, this film Perfect, you obviously see this exercise, I don't say craze, but this movement. Do we see the ideal versions of a masculine or feminine body change, say, over the last 30, 35 years?
Since this movie?
Yeah.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I definitely think that we see a more muscular body, I think, for both men and women, be more aspirational and sort of more accepted and embraced. I think that the standards have changed. I don't think they've shifted that much in terms of what's considered beautiful. Like, we still have a pretty narrow idea of like what's considered attractive, and in some ways one that's even less attainable. Like, when I think about like with men's bodies, like you now see men who aren't even supposed to like be muscle men in movies, and they're like totally ripped, not to mention the superheroes. And I think that has to do a lot with the fact that, it's much more common for not for, I should say, everyday men of a certain social class to like be going to the gym and to be working out. So that's the people on screen are like 7 levels up from that, right? Because they're supposed to be like extra beautiful. So I think that like that, and I think for women too, we definitely see more muscular women who are seen as attractive, and we've and I think that's a good thing in some ways, but on the other hand, it just layers on another kind of expectation of what you need to look like you're not just skinny and muscular too. And so I think that is not great, and it really does challenge, I think, some of the more facile like celebrations of like so much body progress. I don't think we haven't made body progress, but I think most of our on-screen kind of idols are still represent a pretty narrow standard of bodily beauty.
I want to ask you actually about our profession. Did you see the other day there was going around Twitter this AI images of like what different professions look like, and of course you've got the guy with the patches and all that kind of stuff, things like that. So here's the thing I've actually wrestled with myself, which is it taboo to be an academic who is muscular, who is strong, who lifts weights? To show that, is that a thing where it's like, is that hyper masculine, and is masculinity inherently bad, say, in the academic world? So if people are listening to this historians, I actually want to get into this because I've wrestled with like, okay, is it okay to show my body, say, on Instagram, where I'm much more likely to say, hey, I'm lifting this weight or doing this whatever, versus Twitter, where most of my scholarly peers are, which I won't post as many pictures because I'm like, I feel odd, like there's these spaces. What do you think?
Totally complicated. I do think we've come a long way on this in academia, because I think many of us are in the body of thinking, in the business of thinking in sophisticated ways about the body and self-presentation. So I think that some older kind of reflexive responses to be like, oh, like, what's he doing at the gym? He should be in the archives. Or like, why is he performing normative masculinity when he's supposed to be an ally of feminists or whatever? Like, or
he's supposed to be cerebral.
Yeah, exactly. Or I think that we kind of take a little bit of pause now before making those assumptions. That said, there's some stuff that maybe is for good reason beyond the pale. Like, especially because of what I work on, I feel fine, posting pictures of me working out or whatever. I probably, let's be honest, at 44 years old, there are times when I'm like, yeah, I want to lose 5 pounds. I don't think that makes me a bad feminist. Would I put that on line? That's totally uncontroversial for any fitness person or honestly most humans. But as somebody who's a feminist, who's in the work of kind of thinking about the impact of this messaging, I think I would get crap for that, and I should get crap for that. There's nothing helpful about broadcasting more weight loss messages, no matter who you are. And so I think to me, that there's nothing that I think that's the kind of thing academics do look askance at in for good reason.
Yeah, it's definitely something I've wrestled with, and part of me has been maybe Twitter or so forth isn't the space to say, hey, look at my arms, or look at this. I'll go out and swing a big sledgehammer at a tire in the backyard because it's fun. And frankly, it looks cool. It just looks. I put on the Rocky soundtrack. I'm like,
I love it.
Or whatever. Right? It's fun, and so at the same time, and then in my head, I'm like, this is a thing I legitimately enjoy. This is just a very real aspect to who I am. there's nothing wrong with sharing that. But I do worry about like, even like, are people going to take me seriously as an academic because I can bench press a whole bunch of weight?
Right. Well, I take you more seriously as an academic because you throw a sledgehammer and can lift a lot of weight. So you got my vote. Yeah, I mean, these are real questions. And of course, the answer, whether it's like, yes, they will take you less seriously, or no, it's totally fine. Like whatever the court of public opinion decides, like that doesn't actually necessarily mean whether it's right or wrong for you to do this. It just kind of talks about the consequences. So like, I think like I always ask myself with these things, like one, like, what am I kind of accomplishing by like, why am I putting this out there? And two, is the reason I'm putting it out there worth whatever the response might be, whether I think that response is right or not, you know what I mean? And so I don't know, like I don't have a firm answer in terms of Twitter versus Instagram. I mean, you might feel differently about this as a guy, but like, I'm like, people are just so freaking mean on Twitter that even if like, I feel like if anyone, I'm a historian who has the right to post fitness stuff because it's like literally what I wrote a whole book about, but like people are terrible. Like anytime someone disagrees with me, like, what's the default thing? Like, oh, you're like fat and old and hideous. And I'm like, okay, I don't need to be like giving you more fodder for like, insulting me, whether I believe you or not. So I think that's I also see that as like not a place to be. Not that you could have to, by definition, be vulnerable in showing yourself like, you know, doing physical work, but the same way you said, like, oh, I feel like, do I know how to use that machine properly? There's a certain vulnerability of putting yourself out there, particularly in an academic space or an online space. So I think it's like almost a self-preservation question.
No, it totally is. And it's something I will probably continue. I've got back day later today. So, right. Which I enjoy, but it's fine. Yeah. One of the things they don't really get into in the film is this idea about physical fitness as keenly related to mental well-being. And for me, certainly, I'll tell you, I think a lot of people know this because I've posted about it before. You know, I didn't start lifting weights until I was going through my divorce. And it was through that moment of like, this is where I can go. And for whatever reason, I could get away from all of this chaos around me. Right. So my first thought is, listeners, if you'd like to get stronger, divorce your spouses. And then secondly, do you talk any about that in the book as far as like these links? And when does this start to become part of the question as far as like mental health and physical health?
Right. I talk all about it. And so the reason it's not imperfect is because nobody was talking about this in the 1980s. Like, you know, the idea that kind of mental well-being is connected to physical activity. Like, I'm sure lots of people felt that. That's why they kept showing up at the gym. It like made them happier, et cetera. Like they might have experienced that, but that wasn't sort of part of the discourse. It wasn't part of what was being sold in exercise. A lot of the cultural associations with exercise were actually still that these people are narcissistic and vain and even damaged. Like I remember in the movie, so Jamie Lee Curtis's character, people like, I think we can kind of spoil a 40-year-old movie, can't we? It's fine, right?
I believe so.
Oh, okay. So
if you won't want us to spoil stuff.
This isn't even a huge spoiler. But basically, like, so she's this perfect exercise instructor and she's got this following and all the rest. But in some ways, it's her intensity about being this aerobics instructor is depicted as like a function of her emotional damage. Like she'd been in this abusive relationship. She's kind of trying to like suppress that. And so there is this
She always swims when she's angry.
Exactly. And so, and like, maybe that actually is because she like needs the release, but it's definitely her physical activity is seen almost as like a symptom of her emotional damage rather than like, oh, this could help you be cured or to deal with it. And so I think that no one was really talking about it at that time. That totally makes sense from that perspective. In the 1990s, that really starts to change. And that starts to change as there's a broader kind of cultural conversation, one about stress. There's like countless magazine covers about stress, particularly for the kind of worried well. We were going to come back to talking about class, which we can start to do now. Stress for kids, self-esteem as well. There start to be these studies as like a whole generation of girls who's now like come of age with Title IX of like, like, if you play sports, you're less likely to be a victim of domestic violence. Like there's all of that kind of like connection. And then really importantly, yoga, which had been like very separate from exercise, really starts to converge with fitness in this period. And so you start to have not quite scientific studies yet, but a lot of conversation about meditation and enlightenment and sort of release and like all of this kind of emotional therapeutic talk, which comes from the fusion of yoga and fitness in this period. And so that's really when you first start to hear like much more like, oh, it's for my mental health, it's for my well-being, et cetera, in a way that now is totally common.
It seems weird, and this is probably a side, I'm on the autism spectrum, right? And in the 1980s, we were kids, right? As we've discovered, I'm older. People weren't talking about that either. And then that starts to become a discussion people are having. It seems to be like in the 90s, people are much more aware of like what's going on inside, but not just, physically. And you just brought up yoga. One of my best friends in the world, Kristlyn Shefflin, is a yogi. She teaches yoga up in Indiana. She was like, Jay, you got to start going. You got to go.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you see me post or not. I have gone. It is the hardest physical thing I have
What
done.
Kind of yoga? You do like vinyasa or what, what style?
Yeah,
vinyasa. Okay,
it's
got
hot.
it.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so it's hot. Oh, it's hot. What, like 96 or 104?
Yeah, like 96.
Wow.
No, I'm
That's
not
my favorite.
Like, so here's an interesting thing, right? Like as historians, we write about human lives.
Yep.
When I am doing yoga, I feel about human dying. Because for an hour, I am like convinced I am not going to make it to dinner.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. No, it's really hard. It's totally hard.
Oh my God.
And like rings you out in a very different kind of way. Right. And like one of the things that's so interesting in like the 90s is you start seeing like these fusion programs, but it's interesting because like most people who talk about this have written about it from the perspective of like, oh, like this fitness industry totally corrupted the spiritual practice. And now we're getting like, yoga boot camps and it's just about like these physical outcomes. And that's not untrue, but I was sort of more interested in the way that yoga shaped the fitness world and gave this like very physical universe, like a vocabulary and a set of tools to kind of like articulate and expand what they're doing in this much like loftier way. And so, yeah, you get this, you get a lot of these programs that come out of it that are very physically rigorous, but that also are more than physically rigorous. Like it's not just physical, it's about the focus that it takes to hit those poses. It's about, it's a really different kind of thing.
Yeah. And, there's definitely still the gender dynamic. When I go in there, it's almost exclusively women. I'm usually me and like maybe one other guy in a group of like 20 or 22 women, right? So I still feel like, and I was talking to my friend Crystal about this. She's like, and I was nervous about it. I was like, I got the mat you told me to get, but all I could get was pink. She's like, stop being a baby, you big weenie.
Yeah.
Like yoga was invented by a man. I was like, I knew that, so I was very sensitive to it now.
It's hilarious because as your friend says, it actually was a big struggle for women to ever be able to really study with yoga gurus and to get certified. Like in India, this was a male preoccupation.
That's insane.
Yeah. So you hear like Indra Devi, who is one of the like chief promoters of yoga in the United States in the 1950s, like she goes to India and has to like make a big fuss to be allowed to study and to even teach yoga. And it's only in the United States where, a few things kind of come together where you, first of all, you have like this kind of association with the East, this like orientalized gaze on this like feminized world of the East. Like that's a big part of it. It's also billed as this kind of gentle exercise program. So like that's a big part of it, that it's like seen as like not hardcore, but sort of gentle stretching, hatha yoga for women. I think that those things like, and it's also like billed as a way to build like grace and flexibility, which tend to be things that, are marketed to women. Lean, the yoga body of the 90s is a really big deal. But that being said, in the United States, so for that reason, I always laugh when like now they're like these like broga yoga programs, which are like, men, it's okay for you to do yoga too. I'm like, it kind of always was, although I get it, what you were saying. But, I think that it's interesting though, because still in the United States, there have been all of these yoga teachers who are men and honestly have been like total predators, and like where all of these kind of patriarchal phenomena have not been interrupted at all. And I mean, literally when I was writing the book, I'm like, oh my God, I can't like cite another one of these guys and again be like, later brought up on sexual assault charges, but I also can't say it. But I'm like, it sounds so repetitive, but it's so many of them. And I think that a lot of that has to do with like a lot of these alternative communities, a lot of these yoga communities were like, you know, billing themselves as sort of countercultural and alternative. And a lot of them had this powerful man at the center of it. And he's doing these very intimate, like, you know, bodily adjustments and whatnot. A lot of the people who are coming to work with him are women. They're kind of in the thrall of this guy and are being told, like, let go, lean into the practice. You're the one with the hangups, like, you know, and so that, you know, that's unfortunately a very sad and familiar tale, but it's one that even in the, as you experience the rather female world of yoga, there's a lot of that has happened over the years.
Wow. Yeah. There's a lot to unpack here. I would tell you that I very much like, I've told all these people about Perfect over the last like 24 hours. I tell everyone, go to yoga. I'm telling you, you know, it's so weird. Like I'll go in there and I'll post a picture of like this big, huge piece of iron that I could pick up. And then I'm trying to touch my toes, and it's so much harder. I get so much hard. Oh my gosh. And it's cool because it's the weird thing is like I notice when I go. I remember one day I was going to do something like where I had to bend over, and I'd been to go into yoga. I had been going to yoga for a few weeks, and it was like all of a sudden I could like do things. I was like, yeah, oh wow, this is tangible.
One of the best kinds of functional fitness out there. But yeah, it's totally humbling. It's totally different. I don't do it as much as I should, but actually what I'm working on right now feels yogic. I'm really trying to get a handstand. And for me, it's like pure meditation. It's so humbling. It's so freaking hard. And it feels like a good challenge because I'm like totally just that person who's chasing that intense sweat, much like our 0 calorie days in the 90s. I also were like a product of the cardio generation, right? Like if you're not drenched in sweat, it's not worth it, you know? And I'm like, oh, this practice, which is actually really great in a muscular training kind of way. But also just, you have to focus or you're going to like break your neck, you know? And that to me feels like my yoga practice these days.
Have you done CrossFit? Is this a thing you talk about? Like
yeah, I talk about it in the book. I've done CrossFit a few times. I've never like really gotten into it. I honestly feel like I could be really freaking into it. Like I'm like an intense person. I like to chase performance. I also love community around the gym. Like I love also like one thing, I've interviewed a lot of CrossFit people, and one thing I love about hearing from the women in particular is like there are no mirrors there, and everything is about performance. Like nothing's about what you look like in terms of goals. And yet, like, what does a CrossFitter look like? A lot of them look freaking insane. Yeah. And so they, you know, and so that always like really kind of strikes me as a positive thing that I hear about. I mean, you know, the founder of CrossFit is not someone I admire very much. He's like this. I have less problems with the libertarianism and more with what to me seem like the misogyny and the racism. But yeah, Greg Glassman, you know, came up with this incredible concept. He really was totally unimpressed with low intensity, steady state cardio and this like high tech machines at the gym. And so he developed something out of his own training in acrobatics and weightlifting and working with law enforcement that's basically like functional fitness to build capacity to like do incredible stuff. And it's started in, I think he or incorporated maybe in 2000, but it really got off the ground in 2001. And I write about it in the book is like, to me, it like makes perfect sense. It took off post 9/11 because it is like, here, the world is falling apart around us. You don't know when shit's going to hit the fan. And like, you might as well make your body into the most impenetrable force possible. You might as well get off the freaking elliptical and carry something that mimics having to like pull your children out of some like apocalyptic like hellhole. And so I really understand the way that became appealing in that period. And, you know, like it has like a very macho vibe. And like, there's been some, I think like not great politics, like Marjorie Taylor Greene was a CrossFit affiliate, right?
I was waiting to bring her up.
Like, so it has like a resonance with some of that kind of politics. That said, in New York here, I know all of these like queer CrossFitters who are all bought in, and it is like such an important site of community. So I think a positive part of his kind of libertarian style is that, he never made it a franchise, which would have like very tightly controlled the brand, but was sort of like, the best shall rise to the top. And like that actually created a space for some very different kind of communities to germinate on the floor. And I will say that, both like I know some really passionate queer CrossFitters who are deeply into it, but also in terms of age, like, they're like old ladies who like do this so that they can pick up their grandchildren, and they're part of that community too. And I think that's really cool.
This is a really important aspect because it really kind of actually in a lot of ways hits home to like HATM, which is the idea I always talk about. This is like the most important thing to me is like this idea of this community that we're building, right? And that's one of the cool things that like I don't do CrossFit, although I got a great appreciation for like this idea is like people go there and they're like, oh, I can go do this, right?
Yep.
In fact, a lot of ways I look at the CrossFit guys, I'm like, oh, that aesthetic is I think very like I think I would want to try to do.
Yeah.
Because I think those guys are like ripped out of their minds. It's also kind of a weird thing because I think one of the things that really I was hesitant to do as far as go to the gym early on in my life was because I was afraid of getting made fun of. We talk about the important like Nautilus and like, oh, let me be very discreet. And the reality I've always found is that it's been actually the exact opposite. I've actually always found when I go to the gym, people are actually incredibly supportive.
Totally.
Strangers, hey, can you give me a spot? Can you do this? And look, I know there's definitely, and I'm actually incredibly socially awkward, like when it comes to women at the gym, because I'm so worried of like, I don't make eye contact. I'm just kind of looking down at the ground the whole time because I'm so afraid of like, you hear the stories of women getting hit on and this, that, and the other. And I don't know what kind of experiences you've had or that you talk about in the book, but it's like, generally for me, my experience at the gym has always been one of actually like, hey, you're welcome here. Like our music sucks and wear your own headphones. But aside from that, like this is actually a very welcoming space.
Yeah. Well, I think
I've always felt.
That's evolved over the years. Like one of the things, and it's different in every place. Like there are definitely places that like bill themselves as being exclusive and like kind of like you got to be part of the in group to be in there. But I will say, I think that was more common in many gym environments than it is today. And so like you would have, I'd read these articles in the 80s or 90s of like, oh, these gyms are opening and like, they kind of bill themselves as like the place for the beautiful people. And I spoke to the person who founded Equinox, which is this high-end club. It started in New York. And she said that, it was a real struggle to get, they wanted it to be like elite and like beautiful and, fancy and expensive and all the rest. Yeah. But she said like, they also wanted to have clients. And so she said she'd have like friends who'd be like, well, I'm going to join like the Jack LaLanne club just to lose 10 pounds before I come. And, and she was like, no, we don't want to do that. But that was kind of a presumption. And there was this club called the Vertical Club in New York City, which was a little bit like Sports Connection, but New York style. And like, I remember reading an article and the manager said something like, no, we don't have fat people here. And I'm like, fat people actually could be a great demographic for you because, for all the obvious reasons. But I think that, that has changed in part, just it's like a capitalist imperative that like, it's better to be a little bit more welcoming and have more people want to feel welcome and show up. But I feel that too. I mean, I feel at the gym, and granted, I think, we both have a degree of privilege in that regard of like feeling comfortable in certain spaces for sure. But like my experience is for the most part, people either want to be left alone or they're like pretty like friendly. I will say I've spent a lot more time in my day in like the group fitness and studios than on the gym floor. And like, it really is a different world and it feels really different. I mean, the group fitness studios are much more kind of protected. They have their own dynamics, but like you don't feel watched and like sort of vulnerable in the same way because there's one instructor telling everybody what to do. And sure, if you're in the front row, that's like a big like panopticon situation. But you can like kind of blend in the back and like, you don't feel like people are looking at you, much less really like hitting on you. The gym floor is much more male. And also like, you're kind of on your own. So like, definitely sometimes I mean, the gym I go to is very gay. So like, I don't think any of these guys like they're like, I'm like totally invisible to them, but like, it definitely feels like this like open field in a lot of places. And I think that's a little bit overwhelming, not just from a skill level, but if you're a woman.
How has social media changed the way we look at exercise in the United States?
Well, I think it's made exercise like even more inescapable. I should say the pressure to exercise, in some ways the access too, because there's a lot of free content. But unfortunately, I think that it's almost inescapable now to have to think about your body and the work that you like supposedly should be doing on your body. I mean, we used to talk in our day about like the pressures of these magazines and, you know, you need to get prom arms and a flat stomach and all that. But you know what? You could close the magazine. And I think that like,
Yeah.
you know, that's sometimes seen as the bad old days, because it's true that these magazines have gotten better, I think. And like, they're not like just promoting the same very narrow, like, you know, get skinny fast kind of messaging. But the magazines are like almost beside the point now. Like that's not the main place anyone's getting their information. So I think that social media, unfortunately, has made these pressures to exercise like basically inescapable. And that's really, really unfortunate. I do think a real positive part of social media is that because of its, you know, the democratic way that people can get involved, it really has pushed the needle on like thinking in a more sophisticated and inclusive and equitable way about body size and fitness and health and discrimination and fatness and all the rest. And that action happening on social media is actually pushing the needle in more legacy media as well. And so in that regard, I think it's really good, because I don't think that some of these, you know, someone like Jessamine Stanley, who's a self-described fat black yogi, like I don't think ever would have been in these mainstream environments that she's in now if she hadn't started with like her own Instagram account. Right. And so I think that there's there are real positives to that too. It's also, I find it motivating. Like you and I were talking about sharing our own stuff. I mean, sometimes I find things a little like intimidating and dispiriting, but I find it really motivating to have a community to share my own things with. And also there are fitness influencers I follow who I think are like, I just like really like seeing what they're up to, and it inspires me. And so I think that can be good too.
Yeah, I have the exact same thoughts on that, right? And when I started getting into, say, weightlifting, things like that, we're talking about like not knowing what to do in the gym.
Yeah.
Well, now I can get on my phone and be like, what do I do with this damn kettlebell?
Yeah.
Right? I got this one guy, you know, Every Damn Dre, his name is, his handle is on Instagram. And he does this incredible like kettlebell stuff he started doing during COVID, because he's like, I can't go to the gym. I got these 3 kettlebells. What can I do? And then he just cut himself up, right? It's just like, I was like, oh, I'll just start. Like, so when I've got a few minutes and I don't have time to go to the place, I can just do stuff here at the house or whatever. And so there's this incredible aspect of like, oh, I need to learn how to do exercise. My stuff's getting stale. What do I do? And yeah, you know, like these, there's an aspirational aspect of like, I want to look like this guy, or I want to be able to look like this guy so I can get the girl who was with this guy,
right,
or whatever. And then I do also sometimes worry. We talked about the links of physical well-being to mental well-being. And then I'm like, does social media and all these influencers, you know, because it's a very curated space, then have the a side effect of creating this negative spots where I am not good enough. I need to make myself X, Y, or Z.
Yes, I think that they absolutely do. And like one thing that I always try and think about for myself, but also as a parent, is like, you know, what are the ways to kind of take the good from this context that we live in and, you know, dispense with like the more damaging things. And like one of the things, like, you know, with all this body stuff, like on the one hand, I mean, one of the things I kind of think about is like, I don't know if it's because the pressures are so great or because there's some intrinsic desire to like care what you look like, but I'm kind of done denying that. Like, I think I'm kind of done like sort of shaming people for like caring what they look like and wanting to look better. Like, I think that's okay. I think it's part of self-improvement. I think self-presentation is important, and like we shouldn't like act like it's silly or bad or a failure to care about how you look, right? And it can be really fun, actually, if you think about like social media and makeup or fashion. I don't think anybody's really shaming people in that regard. The physical fitness stuff I think is really hard because like it's your body, right? And so there are all of these barriers to actually like how you can modify your body, and you can become very unhealthy in the pursuit of that. But one of the things I always think and tell my kids is like, think about like with exercise, like why are you doing this, right? Like, for what purpose? Does it make you feel good what you're looking at online? Like, does this make you feel sad as you're looking at somebody like, oh, I want to be that way, I want to look like them? Or does it make you feel inspired? And then also remember, no matter what, like, how you look is the least interesting thing about you, you know? And I think that to me is like so important, that like, it's fun to get my hair done and like look cute in a bikini and all these things, but that's not who I am. That's like icing on the cake. And I think that like once you like can wrap your head around that, which is hard in a culture, which is especially for women, but for men too, it's telling us like all you are is your appearance. But like once you can kind of, if you can get past that, then I think you can take some of the sort of fun parts of reinvention, whether it's in the gym or fashion or all of that, and you know, and that can be something, a part of like really feeling good. And I think, you know, that's really hard to do, but I think it's worth kind of having an honest conversation about and talking about, while also remembering with exercise in particular, there are so many, I think, more important benefits to exercising than anything aesthetic, like anything, like mental health, strength, longevity, better sleep, like all of these things. To me, that's just like community. Those are so central. But like, let's not just be like, oh, the aesthetics are bad to care about, you know?
No, and I'll use your account actually as an example, because when I see you posting, I'm like, no, straight up, like it's a like, here is a real serious, actual real academic person who writes books and is super smart, who also exercises and takes care of her body. And it's okay, Jay, if you do the same thing, right?
Yeah.
It's like, actually, not only is it okay, here's a person who is your friend, and then you've got this linked to community with. I think it's actually, I think it's great, because ordinarily, you know, I wouldn't know these aspects about you, you know, or we wouldn't share these commonalities. So when I see you post or whatever, I'm just like, oh, cool.
Thanks. That makes me feel good. Thank you.
No, my gosh, you're kidding me? It's like, for me, it's kind of a relief, I'll tell you, just because I worry. I'm just like, what am I doing? Oh,
I'm in your corner. Thanks for saying that. And I should say, when we were talking about social media before, I mean, I have gotten, like, to me, very meaningful feedback. Especially, I think things are changing in academia a little, but like a few years ago, especially when I was teaching fitness more, and there were definitely like, you know, academics a little younger than me who were just like, thank you for showing that you have a full life and you're a whole person, and you can like, you know, that's not something that is often like we're encouraged to kind of show online. And so I try to do that without being like too overshare-ish, but I'm glad that that lands with you. So thanks.
Oh, you know, I'm totally putting on Twitter Storm later on. This is back. It's not my decision. I was talking to a friend of mine.
You told me to. Yeah.
You know, it's not Tuesday, it's Lat Day, whatever. So, I want to ask you about this. 3 films. This film is so much about exercise and the body, or like, you know, it's a love story, I guess. Is Travolta a handsome guy? I don't know, but like, what other films, when you think about bodies in film, that can tell us about the way people are looking at bodies, or talking about bodies, or internalizing bodies? Are there other films that you have picked up on that really do a good job talking about ways in which we consider the body?
You know, I mean, yes. And like, let me just put this more in like the more basic of like films about bodies and fitness that I kind of appreciate, you know. One, we talked about Pumping Iron. I just think it is such a classic, because for some of the reasons that we talked about, but like also just like, it is such an example of like the enduring kind of like freak show dimension of like very super muscular bodies, at the same time that more people are beginning to feel like, wait, I should be doing something like that, you know? And so to me, it is such a like interesting turning point movie. And, you know, so Arnold Schwarzenegger used to hang out at Muscle Beach, and like a lot of those Muscle Beach guys.
I'm dying to live there.
Yeah, totally. And, you know, you got to go check out the original at Santa Monica, and then go to the Venice Beach one, which is like now where people hang out, but where he was too. It moved in 1957, I think. But one of the things that's interesting about that is that, you know, Vic Tanny, who was another one of these Muscle Beach guys in the 50s and went on to create all these clubs, these fitness clubs, like for men and for women. He talks about when he first opened a gym, and like he and his brother set it all up, and people came in and they're like, are we supposed to like pay to watch you lift those things? Like, why? Like they had no idea they would be doing this too. Yeah. And so I think that like Pumping Iron is which happens like 40 years after that event occurred, but like, it's just such an amazing primary source, like looking at that transition from like, this is a freak show spectacle to something that should and will engage many of us. And it's also interesting because that's a moment when like jogging is already really underway and really popular. And you see these tensions within fitness culture where like those like, bodybuilder guys are like, oh, some like, wimpy jogger. Like, is that your wife's jogging suit? There's some line like that in there at some point. And so you see like all fitness, like when people talk about fitness culture, I'm like, it's not all the same. Like lifting weights for how you look, which is bodybuilding versus weightlifting, that's a totally different animal than being a jogger, a triathlete, or like a jazzerciser. So I would say that is a really important one. And then, this one is a little bit, I think, actually, let me say it's an inspiring one for me, which I don't know, is it about bodies? But I just,
what do you got?
It makes me want to work out. Let me tell you, I'll give you this one and then do you know what it is? Can you guess?
No, I have no idea where you're going.
Blue Crush. Did you ever see that movie?
Oh, yes. Look, there is a surfboard behind me.
I love it.
I was literally talking this morning about doing a class on the history of surfing.
Oh my gosh, that's a great idea. So Blue Crush, my God, the first time I saw that movie, I went outside and for the first time in my life, I ran the whole like round of Central Park, which is 6.2 miles. And like, I don't know, there was something about like, I should watch it again to have more intelligent things to say, but the like athleticism and the beauty and the beach thing. Like it was a kind of a beach movie, but it definitely wasn't like Baywatch. Like, Michelle Rodriguez was this like hot Latina in there too, who was really muscular. Like just the whole thing. I remember just being like, I just want to work out and like move to the beach, even though I like don't even like the water and swimming. But yeah.
Surfing movies are inherently body movies.
Totally.
Fact, you and I were talking. It was like I was kind of shot you that email about like what to expect for the pod. I was like, I watch a lot of surf films because I'm kind of fascinated with surf culture.
Yeah.
And they, you go back to those like beach blanket 50s films, and that's right there too. Where
totally.
People out there, and we always talk about like, oh, who's the greatest athlete? This, that, and the other. Is it Michael or is this like Kelly Slater, y'all?
Mm-hmm.
Kelly freaking Slater. Him or Alex Honnold maybe, because when Honnold did that free solo of El Cap, but like Slater, a surfer, like I'm no disrespect to team sports, but you go be Laird Hamilton and go down 30, 50 foot faces on Jaws or off Maui. No.
Totally. Yeah. My son is a surfer. And so I've spent a lot of time like watching him, and he's not as into it anymore, but he's still pretty into it. And the athleticism is like really amazing. And also talk about the like meditative dimension to it. He's kind of a thoughtful kid. And like, I can tell that some of what he likes is just like the floating out there alone, waiting for the wave. Like,
there's a stoicism there, right?
Yeah.
There's definitely a Oh, I like, again, so I've got my paddleboard behind me, and I bought it totally because like Laird, and I've got the biggest man crush on Laird Hamilton. That's a story for another podcast, ladies and gentlemen. All right, I want to move back to this movie that you had me watch.
Yes.
Perfect, from 1985, which all of you should go be watching right now. Is Perfect a history movie?
For sure. Perfect is it's a perfect primary source of the 1980s. I think both in the role of this new health club as singles club. Interestingly, it's one of those examples where the silences and the sources are relevant too, because a huge part of gym culture, even at that gym, I learned, was as a space for gay men. And you really don't see anything but like heteronormative like relationships there. But there's a great episode of the Netflix show Worn Stories, which is all about like fashion as fashion articles of clothing as like historical relics. And the designer, Simon Doonan, talks about going to that gym at the height of the AIDS HIV crisis and those aerobics classes just being this like fun, immersive, amazing, escapist environment that was so crucial when his community was like, just being kind of destroyed around him. So yeah, it's definitely a history movie in terms of the role of the gym, in terms of the attitudes about exercise is both this like hot new thing, but also something these like damaged idiots in LA do. It also speaks a little bit to like a media monoculture in a way, because, it's based on this true story written by Rolling Stone journalist Aaron Latham. And like that whole notion that like a cover story on Rolling Stone was like the national conversation, like it's a very different moment. So yeah, there's a lot there. I totally think it's a history movie. Did you think it was a history movie?
Yeah, oh my god, yeah. So I was watching this film, and I looked it up when you tell me. It's like, okay, this movie, it didn't do well at the box office. It doesn't have high reviews on, I guess, like Rotten Tomatoes or whatever. And then I started watching it as a historian, and I'm like kind of legitimately enjoying the film actually, just because I've got a background into it. I was like, okay, let's check it out. As a scholar of like society, like I was like, oh my god, there is like you want to show your students what 1985 looks like. Here's this movie,
yeah,
right. And like you were saying, like here's all this stuff on class, East Coast, West Coast, male female dynamics, sexuality, all this stuff on computers. The fact that like print media is so important, right? That I always had subscriptions to magazines. I don't have a single one now.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, I think you're totally right.
By the way, as we're wrapping up, Martha Stewart, Sports Illustrated. Can you talk about that?
Yes. Okay, so Martha Stewart is on the cover of Sports Illustrated. She's 81 years old, right? In a swimsuit. I mean, like my knee-jerk reaction is great. Like this is not some like landmark achievement for feminism, but good for Martha Stewart. There is a time not that long ago where anyone on the cover of Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue had to be like a size 2 woman with like double D's, and like anyone else was considered like beyond, like a scandal, right? I remember when Ashley Graham was on the cover, who is a very curvy kind of plus size model, but pretty conventionally attractive young, that people freaked out. You're like promoting ill health. She's disgusting, all the rest. So like, I think, we have talked a lot about categories of identity and intersectionality and feminism. Often age with women is one that doesn't really get brought up. I mean, really recently we've talked about like on my podcast and in our culture about how like menopause gets no attention in the medical industry, in part because it's like, well, once a woman's past like childbearing age, who the hell cares about her anyway? Much less think she's hot. And like, there's Martha Stewart, attractive, gorgeous, like go Martha Stewart, right? On the other hand, now
be a historian and ruin it.
Now I'll be a historian and ruin it. Okay. So I think like great, like we're an older woman can be on this like cover of the most conventional, like, magazine. On the other hand, I would say the Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue is like kind of like a place for objectification, like in general. So like, is it like that much of a coup for her to be on there? Yes, because she doesn't really fit the profile, at least in terms of her age, of the kind of woman our culture feels is worth objectifying. But so that doesn't seem to be like that great. Then, she looks amazing, full stop. It's certainly amazing for 81, but that's
stunning.
Yes, stunning, I think. That's also a function of, she has access to the best food and skincare and personal trainer and glam squad. Like, this is not a sort of like normal, she doesn't have a normal life. So I do, the criticism I am most kind of like attuned to is like, I do think when we have like older women who like, are still hot or like, really kind of defy these expectations of what an older woman should look like, it does risk kind of raising the bar in the sense that like there's this pressure on what it means to look a certain age. And I mean, this really reared its head perhaps in a more relevant way at the Super Bowl when J-Lo and Shakira did their performance and they were like, I think 45 and 50 or something like that. And on the one hand, I mean, I am always like, damn, like this is amazing. These women look great. Like this is what 50 looks like. Like there was immediately people were memeing like, the Golden Girls were this age when they started and like, look at them today. And like, I think that's so great. And that does reflect like changes in our attitudes about who should exercise and who's beautiful and also real things about longevity too. So that I think is all
what's
awesome.
possible.
Yeah. On the other hand, there were a lot of women, and I totally respect this, who were like, are you freaking kidding me? Like, that's now the standard of what like 50 looks like. Like, come on, like that, like like, let it be the one good part of like being past the age where your, sexual desirability is seen to be like the most important thing about you, is like not having to care as much. Right. And so, I think I'm very sensitive to that too. That's something I talk a lot about in the book, because there's all of these like women who sell these fitness programs to wives and women, God forbid, over 30 and then over 40. And the idea is like, you don't have to be a matron. You can still be whistle bait. And like, on the one hand, it's like, great. You can be like hot after you have kids and you can still be desirable and all the rest. Like, that's wonderful if that's what you want. On the other hand, it's like, Jesus, I have to get my kids to school and now I have to be whistle bait too. Like, so I think it's a mixed bag overall, probably a good thing, but like, I think it's a mixed bag.
Awesome. Natalia, where can people find you online? And in the world, because you've got a pod as well.
Yeah, exactly. So you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Natalia Petrzela. My website's nataliapetrzela.com. I have a weekly podcast with two other wonderful historians called Past Present. Find that anywhere. And then a limited series podcast called Welcome to Your Fantasy, which is about the Chippendales, which I hope you'll enjoy. And then, of course, if you're interested in these themes, get my book, Fit Nation, which is all about exercise culture in America.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here today.
This was so fun. Thank you so much. Let's go work out.
And that's a wrap here at Historians of the Movies podcast. Thank you so much to our guest, Natalia Petrzela. You can find her, of course, on Twitter at Natalia Petrzela. You can find her online at nataliapetrzela.com. You can find her books. You can find her Classroom Wars, which came out in 2015. You can find Fit Nation, which came out this year. She's got a podcast called Welcome to Your Fantasy and Past Present Pod as well. Subscribe to both of those. She's amazing. So thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. Thank you, of course, to our producer, Fletcher Powell, for taking the time to do this. You can find him on Twitter, Fletcher_Powell. And, of course, you can find me on Twitter as well, at Herbert History. You can always find the films that we're showing on HATM, on the Historians of the Movies Instagram page. And please continue to like, subscribe, share this podcast with folks. If you will, leave us a comment, leave a review online. That'll help the algorithms. So hope you dug the podcast. I'm off to the gym. It is, in fact, back day. I wasn't bullshitting you. I'm heading there. It's time to get swole. So until next time, I'll talk to you later. Ciao for now. Bye.